Hello, I'm Tom Hartman in Washington, D.C., and here's what's coming up tonight on The Big Picture. George Zimmerman is still a free man, and gangs of white supremacists are patrolling the streets of Sanford. Just how bad is the situation in that city, and is the worst yet to come? Also, the gruesome twosome known as the Koch brothers have already done enough damage to America, but they're still at it. What is the Kochtopus up to now? And is there a way to stop this beast? And don't get tangled in the seaweed off the California coast. It's radioactive. What does this new discovery tell us about the safety of nuclear power in America and across the globe? You need to know this. More than 6 weeks after 17-year-old Trayvon Martin was gunned down in Sanford, Florida, the man who pulled the trigger, George Zimmerman, still walking around free. And now we know for sure that Zimmerman will not be charged with first-degree murder. On Monday, the special prosecutor in the case, Angela Corey, decided not to use a Florida grand jury to file first-degree murder charges against Zimmerman. Now it will be up to Corey alone to decide whether or not any charges at all, such as manslaughter or second-degree murder, will be brought against Zimmerman. Meanwhile, Zimmerman is looking for a new lawyer since his legal team quit today, saying that they've lost contact with him.
I want to announce today, as of now, we are withdrawing as counsel for Mr. Zimmerman. We've lost contact with him. Up to this point, we've had contact every day. He's gone on his own.
Zimmerman is also appealing to the public for financial assistance. He recently launched a website at therealgeorgezimmerman.com to give his side of what happened that night in February and solicit donations for his legal fund. On the site, Zimmerman writes, "On Sunday, February 26th, I was involved in a life-altering event which led me to become the subject of intense media coverage. As a result of the incident and subsequent media coverage, I have been forced to leave my home, my school, my employer, my family, and ultimately my entire life." End of quote. This morning on ABC, an attorney for the Martin family responded to Zimmerman's website saying this.
I'll simply say this, he says that he experienced a life-altering event. Well, Trayvon Martin experienced a life-ending event.
That life-ending event now has the city of Sanford on edge. There are reports that gangs of armed white supremacists are roaming the streets. And the mayor of Sanford, Florida, Jeff Triplett, warned that the town has become a kindling box, his phrase. But George Zimmerman isn't the only one who needs to be blamed for this tragedy. We also need to pin the blame on those who pushed for these shoot-first laws in Florida that are today giving George Zimmerman cover. Here is the bigger picture on that. Florida and 20 other states have put together these stand your ground and shoot first laws. And basically what they're doing is they're turning America into a battleground. And it's a battleground where the rules of deadly force are even looser than in Iraq and Afghanistan. As VoteVets.org points out, American and coalition forces in those countries like Afghanistan and Iraq must have very specific things that they must do before they can shoot somebody. Even if that somebody that they're thinking about shooting, they're pretty sure is an enemy intent on killing them. It's called the shout, show, shove, shoot. And here it is from the rules of engagement. You must shout a verbal warning to halt. You must show your weapon and demonstrate your intent to use it. You must physically restrain, block, access, or detain the person. If none of that works, you fire a warning shot if you're authorized to shoot at all. And if that doesn't work, then you shoot the person. In states with the Koch brothers promoted stand your gun and shoot first laws in place, there's no need to shout, no need to show your weapon, no need to try to restrain anybody, and no need to fire a warning shot. All you need to do is, as the law says, feel afraid, and you can shoot somebody dead. Which means that Walmart, America's largest gun seller, can't be sued for selling the gun because the homicide is justifiable. And the Gun Sellers Trade Association, the NRA, makes more money selling guns and ammo. Which may be why both worked on the ALEC task force that created the stand your ground and shoot first law in the first place. Have you ever wondered who's the most afraid of the other, black people or white people? I had a guy call into my radio show yesterday, African American, who said this. The assertion of this author was that black people are far more afraid of white people in the United States. And I've heard that from friends who are African American, but your thoughts?
Hey, of course we are more afraid. You can kill me, don't go to jail.
Yeah.
Why should I be afraid?
Yeah.
You can walk around as Knoxville, Ku Klux Klan, and you can have parades and everything. Every Black Panther you ever knew that's been locked up is still looking for.
And that fear is put on steroids by these shoot first laws. The power of lobbying groups like the NRA and Walmart are turning America into a battleground filled with fearful, trigger-happy people. And it's a battlefield where the rules are even more violent and less rational than the battlefield of Afghanistan. It's time to quit being ruled by the constant drumbeat of fear. A drumbeat, by the way, that is pushed and promoted constantly by Fox and the right-wing media, and return to being the home of the brave. For more on this topic, I want to turn it over to our progressive commentator, big picture producer, Sam Sachs. Sam, welcome.
Thanks, Tom.
Great to have you with us.
Be on.
Zimmerman's lawyers jumped ship today. Actually, before we get to that, you grew up about 30 minutes from Sanford, Florida.
Right, yeah, I grew up,
Go ahead.
I grew up about, 30, 40 minutes away from Sanford in Daytona Beach, and I've been through Sanford a lot. This isn't exactly an affluent place. I think the median income is somewhere below 25,000. The unemployment rate there is 11%. So when you hear all these reports coming out that the community is on edge, it's kind of a perfect storm there. It's economic turmoil, and now this act of violence that is tearing the community apart. I mean, if you remember the London riots last year, that was started when police shot and killed someone. But that wasn't the real reason for the riot. I mean, the real reason was because this was a place that was devastated by austerity economics. Mm-hmm. And here's another part of the country that's feeling the recession very hard, that has a governor in Rick Scott that is pushing austerity.
They actually turned down federal money, which would have put people to work in that area.
Exactly. So what you don't want to say, well, a black kid was shot, suddenly there's going to be race riots. But we could see a bad perfect storm here that could lead to very uncomfortable situation in the city.
Yeah, and had the Coctopus not been operating, if we didn't have the stand your ground laws, and if there wasn't this push to austerity, this trickle-down austerity that the Republicans are promoting, and Rick Scott says, no, we're not going to take money for light rail.
Yeah.
I mean, that would have put a lot of people to it. Where is Sanford? That light rail route was what, Tampa to Orlando?
Tampa to Orlando. So Sanford is farther east of Orlando and a little bit farther north.
So it probably wouldn't have been a big impact.
I mean, it's not a long commute from Sanford to Orlando for workers had they been working on the project.
Had there been jobs there.
Yeah, that's
the lawyers pulled out of this thing. It might, looking at having lawyers pull out of a case is nothing new. It happened in the Casey Anthony case. Mm-hmm. It has happened in a number of high-profile cases over the years. But usually when lawyers pull out, if they hold a press conference, they say things like, we have other things we have to do, or we wish him well, or,
right.
He's got a new lawyer, so good luck, or, whatever. This lawyer comes out and says, basically, this guy's gone flaky. Mm-hmm. He's not communicating with us. He might have run away. I mean, this is all implicit in what they were saying. Isn't that malpractice on the part of a lawyer?
It could be. It very much could be. And I mean,
do you think that the lawyers might be trying to telegraph to the Sanford authorities that this guy's on the lam?
Well, I think the lawyers are trying to telegraph that Zimmerman might be losing his mind almost. I mean, let's look. If you're under investigation, the last thing you want to do is be talking all over the place.
Right.
And since then, he created a website, which if you want to reach the most amount of people, you create a website and start talking. He reached out to the prosecutor's office, which is probably the last place you want to go talking to. And he's apparently reached out to Sean Hannity and held an interview with Sean Hannity. So I think this is a guy who, I don't want to come to the defense of Zimmerman, but at the same time, he's one of the most reviled people in America. And perhaps with good reason. You don't want to judge someone before they've been in a court of law, but you would think that it would almost be a favor to him to prosecute him at this point, to be able to have his day in court. And I mean, I think his behavior speaks to that.
It seems to me that there was an autopsy done. And that autopsy will reveal the trajectory of the bullet is either going to comport with Zimmerman's story or it's going to blow it apart.
Yeah.
I mean, you know, it's going to tell us who was on top. It's going to tell us what the positions of them were relative to each other, how close they were, whether there were any signs of a struggle, you know, on the part of Trayvon, whether there was, you know, skin under his fingernails or bruised knuckles, if he actually punched Zimmerman hard enough to injure Zimmerman. That's going to show up on the kid's knuckles. I mean, you know, all that stuff is going to come out. And the fact that none of that stuff has come out says to me, and I'm not an expert but a speculator here, that they may be putting together a second-degree murder case.
Yeah, well, first-degree murder's off the table with the special prosecutor basically canceling the grand jury convening, which was supposed to be today. And so it's going to be strictly up to her to choose what charges she wants to bring against Zimmerman. And it's looking like it could be manslaughter or second-degree
Zimmerman's
murder.
dad is a judge.
Yeah.
Right. And Zimmerman has vanished. You know, and his lawyers are coming out and saying he's vanished. I just wonder if his lawyers are doing a CYA here, that they have knowledge that their former client is doing something illegal, like fleeing the state of the country, or something on the edge of it. Or
They want to get as far away from it as possible.
That's right, and they want to cover their butts. They want to telegraph this message. The Sean Hannity part I found was fascinating. Fox has been constantly promoting this idea on Fox that maybe Zimmerman was really the victim. You know, I mean, Fox plays the race card really, really subtly but well, and they've done it for years and years. And it seems to me that Hannity, who's no idiot, I mean, Sean Hannity's a smart guy. If he interviewed Zimmerman, it would have been with an eye to thinking, asking himself the question, if I put this guy on TV, is he going to come across as sincere? Is it going to add to the Fox News narrative that Zimmerman was the victim, not the perpetrator? And if Hannity didn't put him on TV, which he didn't do, that says to me that even Hannity thinks this guy's guilty.
Yeah, and that's kind of interesting too, because this would be the bombshell interview. I mean, this would get so many ratings, and that's what Fox cares most about, is getting the ratings. But it seems like they would put getting the ratings second to their agenda of, you know, protecting George Zimmerman here, or making it look like that there are, you know, black hoodlums patrolling the streets that are threats to all of us around here. I don't know. We'll see. Apparently, there's going to be a comment on that made tonight on the Hannity show on what his interview was about, or what he learned from Zimmerman. So we're going to have to see it with that.
Should be interesting. Sam Sachs, thanks for being with us.
Thanks a lot. Yeah.
After the break, there's an evil two-headed creature attacking America right now, and it has its tentacles all over our economy and democracy. What's the Coctopus up to now, and is there any way to slay it?
We just put a picture of me when I was like 9 years old on To Tell the Truth.
I have a confession. I am a total ghetto princess. I love rap and hip-hop music and Christian music.
I thought he was kind of a dick yesterday.
I'm very proud of the role that Al Jazeera has played.
You know how sometimes you see a story and it seems so whole and complete, you think you understand it, and then you glimpse something else. You hear or see some other part of it and realize everything you thought you knew, you don't know? I'm Tom Hartman. Welcome to The Big Picture.
The Cocktopus is screwing us all. It begins with New Jersey Governor Chris Christie, a frequent guest at the billionaire Koch brothers' annual political strategy sessions and one of the larger tentacles of the Cocktopus. Turns out Christie was lying to keep more of his constituents in New Jersey out of work. Back in 2010, Governor Christie axed plans to build a new train tunnel across the Hudson River that would have put thousands of Americans to work, building one of the largest infrastructure projects in the nation. Governor Christie said New Jersey couldn't afford the project and cited the potential for cost overruns as a reason for killing it. But a new report out by the Independent Government Accountability Office shows that Christie was lying. He was lying to the citizens of New Jersey and the citizens of America. While Christie claimed that the tunnel would cost $14 billion to build and that his state would have to pay 70% of that cost, the new GAO report shows that the tunnel was only going to cost $14 billion, and most importantly, New Jersey was only going to have to pay 14% of the cost, not 70%. Of course, the real reason why Governor Christie claimed his state couldn't spend money to put more Americans back to work, even that little 14%, is because he'd already promised billions of dollars in state tax cuts and tax breaks for big corporations and rich people. But again, that's just one tentacle of the Cocktopus. To get to the heart of the Cocktopus, we have to take a look at the American Legislative Exchange Council, or ALEC, a think tank partially supported by the Koch brothers' fortune. Here for the latest news coming out of ALEC and what the Cocktopus is up to, I'm joined by Zed Jelani, investigative reporter with the Republic Report and communications and outreach coordinator with the United Republic. Zed, welcome back.
Great to be here.
Great to have you. Can you give us an overview of the Cocktopus?
Yeah, so the Koch brothers are basically these billionaire industrialists. They made most of their money from oil, gas, and chemical sort of industries, and they fan their money all over literally hundreds of organizations. Everything ranging from organizations like Americans for Prosperity to also funding ALEC to even funding universities and academic departments.
That's extraordinary. And in fact, the thing I find very ironic is that their father made his money cutting deals with Joe Stalin for the old Soviet Union back in the 40s and 50s, and then funded the John Birch Society, didn't he?
That's exactly true. I mean, this was it was the mid 20th centuries when there was a gigantic push by a lot of industrialists and sort of billionaires, and they saw what happened with the New Deal, and they're saying we got to stop this, otherwise they'll keep going until we have a prosperous, somewhat egalitarian type society.
We can't have that.
No.
Yeah. So you were saying?
Yeah. So basically, we've had this massive movement, and the way that they impact state legislatures is through ALEC. ALEC ships legislation written mostly by its corporate members. I mean, it's more than 98% funded by corporations, very little grassroots funding, and they ship that legislation to different state legislatures, and those legislatures pass that corporate-friendly legislation, and they never let you know that it was ALEC legislation. So it's all done very secretive, very sort of under the table.
Yeah, it's quite remarkable. You guys have done some really great reporting on this too. The link between AT&T, the Cocktopus, and climate change denial. This is a particularly fascinating one.
Yeah, so as you know, Koch funds ALEC to basically pass corporate-friendly state legislation. Well, a bunch of other companies also fund ALEC, and AT&T is one of them. Now, AT&T publicly is very much along the lines of saying we need to deal with climate change, we believe it's man-made, we need to control carbon emissions, so on and so forth. But yet, secretly, they're funding this organization, which all over the country is passing resolutions and state legislatures saying that there is no such thing as man-made global warming, fighting any sort of efforts to limit carbon emissions, requiring schools, this is really interesting, requiring schools to teach both sides of the global warming debate. So that means
both sides.
Both sides, right? So they'll teach the science, which is legitimate, and then they'll teach non-science in a science classroom, basically propaganda saying this doesn't exist. And so, we're catching AT&T in the act here, and a bunch of groups have gotten together and starting to call on AT&T to stand up to its words. If it really does believe in global warming, it shouldn't be funding this organization that's trying to brainwash kids into saying that there isn't any global warming.
It's very much the same tactic that the tobacco companies were using 20 years ago in suggesting that there were two sides to the debate over whether tobacco caused cancer.
No, it's really very, very similar. And there's a similar debate going on over evolution. I mean, basically the idea is that corporations know that when it comes to science, Americans love scientists and our kids love to learn in science classrooms, so they can't just outright deny it. But what they can say is, oh, there's a huge debate. You need to include all these views that aren't driven by science, but maybe, sponsored by ExxonMobil or AT&T in this case.
Remarkable. Color of change, the PCCC, have threatened corporate donors with boycotts, corporate donors to ALEC with boycotts. Pepsi-Cola, Coca-Cola, Kraft, now the Gates Foundation. I didn't even realize Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation was giving hundreds of thousands of dollars to this tentacle of the Cocktopus. They've all backed out. Is this a new model for fighting the Koch brothers?
You know, I think it is, because basically ALEC is like a union for corporations. Not every company in ALEC necessarily agrees with everything they do. Like, I doubt AT&T has a position on, you know, the stand your ground, shoot first laws. But what we're doing is we're shaming them. We're telling them that you are in this union and you do have to defend what your money is used to do. So if you don't agree with it, pull out. And I think, you know, 5 or 6 major corporations, everything from Pepsi and Coca-Cola to the Gates Foundation, have pulled out of ALEC. And I think if they want to continue to stand up for values that they espouse in public, they shouldn't continue to fund this organization in private that does all these terrible things.
Yeah. A better analogy might be a gang than a union. But I get it. I get it. Zed, thanks a lot for being with us tonight. Great to see you. The influence of the Cocktopus can no longer be ignored in American politics today. But how did the Kochs get so pervasive? Well, they have someone to thank for it. Here's the bigger picture. The Cocktopus hit maximum power over the past few years, but it was Ronald Reagan who really gave them their launching pad. Back in 1964, Barry Goldwater had revived this odd idea that goes back to the age of the robber barons. Here's Goldwater.
I ask you to join me in helping restore the individual freedoms and initiatives this nation once knew, to make government more the servant and not the master of us all.
Yes, this old idea that the corporation should be able to do anything. But anyhow, it turned out Goldwater didn't pull that off so successfully. He lost pretty badly in '64. The front man was a better speaker than Goldwater. Here's what Goldwater frontman Ronald Reagan had to say in 1964 in support of Barry Goldwater.
This is the issue of this election. Whether we believe in our capacity for self-government or whether we abandon the American Revolution and confess that a little intellectual elite in a far distant capital can plan our lives for us better than we can plan them ourselves.
Yes, so in 1971, Lewis Powell wrote a memo to his neighbor and the president of the U.S. Chamber of Commerce saying that business is under attack and needs to fight back. This followed the publication of Rachel Carson's Silent Spring and Ralph Nader's Unsafe at Any Speed. These weren't really attacks on business. I mean, Powell was characterizing it that way, but what it was an attack on the willingness of businesses to put profits above human lives. Whether it was pesticides, poisonous pesticides, or exploding cars, all of this stuff was being revealed to the media, to the public via the media, by people like Carson and Nader. And Lewis Powell and Ronald Reagan were freaked out about it. So Powell said the business had to organize and push back. They had to change the wording from that elected government thing that protected us from corporate predators into the big government language of Ronald Reagan that stole our freedom. Koch brothers' freedom, for example, to pollute, or GM's freedom to build exploding cars, to exploit workers. So a group of very rich people took up the challenge. And in 1974, they started the Charles Koch Foundation, known today as the Cato Institute. Kochs and others founded the Heritage Foundation and helped birth many other smaller think tanks and media watchdog groups, which, as Lee Atwater said, worked the refs, the referees being the media. So whenever the media said anything nice about liberals, they would get attacked. Or if they seemed critical of conservatives, they would get attacked. Throughout the 1970s, the Cocktopus was under the radar. But they needed a frontman who'd say that government was an elite, ignoring that it's we the people, and saying over and over again that giant corporations and billionaires running our lives was somehow freedom, was a good thing. Now, they'd say it in code. They would talk about individual freedom. The individuals they're talking about are the billionaires, and they found that in Goldwater's frontman, Ronald Reagan. With Reagan's election, the Cocktopus's words found their biggest frontman, the President of the United States. In Reagan's inaugural address, he echoed the main meme, the theme message of the billionaires, that they, the billionaires, could run a nation better than an elected government. Reagan called it self-rule, that the billionaires would run the show, and suggested that they were we the people. And therefore, those few people, the billionaires, could solve our problems better than an elected government.
Government is not the solution to our problem. Government is the problem. From time to time, we've been tempted to believe that society has become too complex to be managed by self-rule, that government by an elite group is superior to government for, by, and of the people.
Now the Coctopus owns legislators in every state, funds bloggers and think tanks and media stars, all pretty much saying the same thing, that the government that our founders fought and died to create, 10 generations of Americans fought and died to defend, that government is, as Reagan said, the problem. It's somehow a very bad thing. And we should, as you heard Barry Goldwater say back in '64, have government serve rich people like Goldwater and his funders, or Reagan and his funders, instead of passing laws to make cars safe and protect us from pesticides. And so now Romney, the modern-day Ronald Reagan, himself worth $250 million, a lot richer than Reagan actually, is echoing Reagan's idea that government will bring down billionaires and big corporations if we, the people, and elected government, have our way.
4 years ago, many Americans trusted candidate Barack Obama when he promised to bring Americans together. But now we've learned that President Obama's idea of bringing us together is not to lift us up, but instead to use the invisible boot of government to bring us all down.
You know, the question before all of us, ultimately, is will the Coctopus win? And really, it's not even the Coctopus. It's the ghost of Reagan. Will the ghost of Reagan win? And democracy be replaced by a government owned and run by the plutocrats? Or will we, the people, win and democracy be restored? It's up to you and me. The only thing that can overcome corporate power like we're seeing today is grassroots activism. Tag, you're it. Crazy alert, aliens after Atlantis? Official video from the latest NASA Space Shuttle mission appears to show what might be UFOs in space. A segment from the live NASA feed shows the cargo bay of the Space Shuttle Atlantis and what appears to be 3 flying objects directly above the shuttle. The objects are in motion in a triangular formation, how we often imagine UFOs might move. The narrator of the live feed tries to explain the objects away with a less than convincing story. Take a listen.
This is Mission Control Houston with Atlantis Commander Brent Jett talking with astronaut Terry Virts here in Mission Control about an object the crew members noted outside the windows of the Space Shuttle Atlantis. Jett describing it as some kind of reflective or metallic looking cloth, but definitely not a rigid or metal object.
Yeah, right. There just happen to be 3 identical pieces of massive metallic cloth moving around in a constant formation in space. So in one of the most convincing UFO videos yet, it appears more likely than ever that we might have company in our universe.
We just put a picture of me when I was like 9 years old on To Tell the Truth.
I have a confession. I am a total ghetto princess. I love rap and hip-hop music and Christian music.
Thought he was kind of a dick yesterday.
I'm very proud of the role that Al Jazeera has played.
You know how sometimes you see a story and it seems so whole and complete, you think you understand it, and then you glimpse something else. You hear or see some other part of it and realize everything you thought you knew, you don't know? I'm Tom Hartman. Welcome to The Big Picture.
Welcome back to The Big Picture. I'm Tom Hartman. Coming up in this half hour, biologists have discovered radioactive seaweed off the coast of California, the latest victim of the Fukushima disaster. Just how much radiation will affect the West Coast, and are American lives in danger? Also, new reports suggest recent earthquakes in the U.S. are, quote, almost certainly man-made, end quote, and fracking is the culprit. So should we be continuing to let energy companies tear apart the ground under our feet? And in tonight's Daily Take, 1%ers are threatening to destroy America and the middle class is hanging on by a thread. How can we eliminate the threat from FDR's economic royalists and restore the American dream? In the best of the rest of the news, we all just lived through the hottest March in the history of our nation. Across the country, more than 15,000 high-temperature records were set, as you can see in this video showing exactly where and when the records were broken over the month, making it the hottest March ever recorded in the 117 years since the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Association began keeping records. Climate change is no longer something to fear in the future. It's happening right now. We see it in strings of massive tornadoes that tear across the American Midwest. We see it in enormous wildfires burning up the East Coast. And we see it in freak hailstorms that drop bowling ball-sized chunks of ice on the ground. All of this is caused by the endless dumping of toxic greenhouse gases into the environment from burning fossil fuels. And we let the people, and we the people need to kick the oil barons and their phony climate scientists out of the halls of government so that we can finally get to work addressing mankind's most serious problem today, a planet that is turning on us. But what we don't need to do is rely on nuclear power as an alternative to fossil fuels. That's a lesson that Fukushima taught us and continues to teach us. Kelp off the coast of California was found to contain levels of radioactive iodine stemming from last year's ongoing Fukushima nuclear crisis in Japan. A team of biologists at California State University, Long Beach, discovered the contaminated kelp, though claimed that the levels of radiation were too low to be harmful. Then again, no amount of radiation is good, but this study does prove that what happens environmentally on the other side of the world does drastically affect the United States. For more on the dangers of nuclear power as an alternative to fossil fuels and what's going on with all this stuff from Fukushima, I'm joined by Paul Gunter, director of the Reactor Oversight Project at Beyond Nuclear. Paul, welcome back to the program.
Hey, thanks again, Tom.
It's great to have you joining us. Radioactive kelp, is this just the beginning for the United States?
Well, I think that what we're seeing is the evidence of the fallout that when we first came on your show back in March of last year, this was the harbinger that the message that we were bringing, that the radioactivity coming off that plant would precipitate all across the Northern Hemisphere. And now, a little more than a year into this accident, we're seeing this bioconcentration, this biomagnification that we were talking about a year ago. It's not only appearing in the kelp now off the coast of California, but we've seen recent studies by the Woods Hole Oceanographic Institute where they're concerned that hundreds of miles off the coast of Japan, we're now showing evidence of bioaccumulation of radioactive cesium in sea bass, some of the closer schooling fish like smelt in lakes and ponds in Japan. We're seeing levels hundreds and thousands of times greater than what would naturally be there, naturally meaning that this is would be from bomb tests and Chernobyl. So we're seeing this incremental increase from all these other accidents that have occurred over the past decades, now being compounded, now being added as additional body burden of radioactive toxicity in our environment.
It's amazing. By bioaccumulation, the water has levels that are tens or hundreds or thousands of times more concentrated. It gets absorbed by the kelp or the animal life. That massively concentrates it, so it becomes tens of thousands of times. Then that gets eaten by the fish, the small fish. They get eaten by the large fish. And by the time it gets to something as big as a 700-pound tuna, what do we have?
We have a situation that can present itself as a health threat sometime down the road. I mean, any exposure at this point raises your risk. But again, what we have to realize is that the Fukushima Daiichi accident is now adding on to a history of radioactive accidents, deliberate testing of nuclear weapons, and this is increasing the body burden of all life.
How is this going to affect Americans living on the West Coast, and also how is it affecting Japanese and outside of the Fukushima area, but like in Tokyo?
Right. Well, again, the radioactive fallout that came from the Fukushima accident, it's now turning up in bamboo shoots, milk, beef. So it's both terrestrial contamination and marine-borne contamination. And, we are bioaccumulators as well.
Right.
So
we're the top of the food chain.
We're the very top of the food chain. And I think that the big concern right now is that all of the radiation standards are not taking into account the most vulnerable of our population, namely children and lactating mothers. But instead, the standards continue to be antiquated because they're based on the most robust in our population, a 25-year-old male worker in a nuclear power plant.
Right. So, well, not good. Paul, thanks so much for being with us.
Hey, thank you again, Tom.
I appreciate it. Thanks for showing up. From one way we're scarring the planet to another way we're scarring the planet. Let's talk about fracking. You might remember in August of last year, the ground here in Washington, D.C. shook. It was a 5.8 earthquake that rattled the East Coast from Virginia to New York, an area that generally doesn't see earthquakes. And some people speculated the earthquake may not have been caused by nature, but instead by man. Fracking, the process by which companies like ExxonMobil extract natural gas miles below the Earth's surface, involves shooting millions and millions of gallons of water and chemicals deep underground. There are several fracking wells up and down the East Coast, and according to the U.S. Geological Survey, fracking might have something to do with the uptick in earthquakes in strange places since 2001. As the USGS put it, recent earthquakes are, quote, almost certainly man-made, end quote. And the USGS has already linked nearly 50 recent earthquakes in Oklahoma, just in that one state, to underground fracking. So knowing what we know now about fracking and earthquakes, should we continue to let energy companies punch holes deep underground, risking more tremors? Dr. Tony Ingraffi joins me now. He is the Dwight C. Baum Professor of Engineering at Cornell University. Dr. Ingraffi, welcome.
Good to be back with you, Tom.
Thank you for coming back in the program. Can you first explain the process of fracking and how the USGS concludes that it's causing earthquakes?
Sure. Fracking is the injection of a man-made fluid, usually water-based, also containing other chemicals, and sand or ceramic beads called proppant into an underground source of a fossil fuel like natural gas or oil for the purpose of opening existing fractures in that rock or creating new fractures in that rock so that effectively it becomes more permeable and it's easier to get the oil or gas out of it. So it's a process that the energy industry calls well stimulation.
Isn't fractured rock part of the normal process of, at least the tectonic process of earthquakes?
Yes. So an earthquake is a seismic event that results usually from either fracturing of rock that has not been fractured or refracturing of rock that has previously been fractured. And it's typically the result of sliding, what we call shearing on a fault system or an existing joint system. And so natural earthquakes result from those kinds of motions. Hydraulic fracturing, in its very essence, is what the industry calls a microseismic event. It's a purposeful fracturing or movement along existing fractures of the rock mass.
So, I'm sorry.
Okay, go ahead.
Finish your sentence. You said, but.
What the industry sometimes says, however, is that the actual act of hydraulic fracturing is microseismic, and that implies that it's such a small release of energy, a small motion on these existing fractures or existing faults, that it's inconsequential as a seismic event. But what they fail to point out is that there are consequences to that fracturing, that hydraulic fracturing. There are two consequences. both of which can lead to significant seismic events, not micro events.
And
those two are when you're injecting very large volumes, and we're talking millions of gallons of fracturing fluid into a rock mass repeatedly in one well, and using current technology repeatedly in closely adjacent wells, you have the possibility of changing what's called the pressure profile or the equilibrium state. The rock has been in places where earthquakes have not occurred for a long period of time in equilibrium. All the natural forces at work down there are paired off against each other and in balance. But when you create additional pressures or change the pressures down there by injecting these fluids under high pressure, you run the risk of causing something, a fault that has been stable, not wanting to slide, to slide. The second thing that happens is that hydraulic fracturing fluid by its nature is meant to be a lubricant. So we also have the possibility, even if we're not changing the pressures too much, we're lubricating a fault that has been in equilibrium for a long time, and therefore allowing it to slip and create a macro seismic event like a 5.3 earthquake in Oklahoma.
Remarkable.
Or a 2.8 in England, or hundreds of 2.8s, 2.3s, 2.5s in Arkansas, Texas, Ohio.
Remarkable.
So I'm sorry I'm being long-winded here, but I want to explain to your readers that it's not just the fracking process.
Right, I got it. And you did a very, very good job of that. Doctor, thank you so much for being with us tonight.
Sure.
Coming up in tonight's Daily Take, the story of America over the last 30 years has been one of exclusion, with the 1% ripping the American dream away from the average Joe. How do we toss out the 1%ers and restore the American dream for the middle class?
We just put a picture of me when I was like 9 years old on To Tell the Truth.
I have a confession. I am a total ghetto princess. I love rap and hip-hop music and Christian music.
I thought he was kind of a dick yesterday.
I'm very proud of the role that Al Jazeera has played.
You know how sometimes you see a story and it seems so whole and complete, you think you understand it, and then you glimpse something else. You hear or see some other part of it and realize everything you thought you knew, you don't know? I'm Tom Hartman. Welcome to The Big Picture.
Your Take, My Take is your chance to send in your questions, comments, rants, and observations about anything we talk about here on The Big Picture or during my radio show. Our first comment tonight from Smitty, a fellow who called on the viewer rant line. He had this to say about a quote I used in a segment last night.
Hello, Tom. Smitty1 here. I really like that segment, Screwed segment. That quote of Ronald Reagan there, that was an absolute gem. Please have that somewhere on YouTube or wherever that I can clip it and send it to my Fox-crazed relatives. I appreciate it. Keep up the good work. Bye.
Thanks a lot, Smitty. Here, just for you is the Reagan side.
Just a few moments ago, I told some people inside the building here of a letter that I just received day before yesterday. It's a letter from a man out here in the country, an executive who's earning in six figures, well above $100,000 a year. He wrote me in support of the tax plan because he said, I am legally able to take advantage of the present tax code, nothing dishonest, doing what the law prescribes, and wind up paying a smaller salary than my secretary gets. Paying a smaller tax than my secretary pays. And he wrote me the letter to tell me he'd like to come to Washington and testify before Congress as to how that's possible for him to do and why it is wrong.
And brilliantly said, oddly enough, Ronald Reagan. And our final comment of the night comes from Taila, our first from Denmark. She posted on the Thom Hartmann Facebook page in response to last night's Daily Take on why Europeans think Americans are nuts. She said, I live in Denmark, and this country has an equivalent to the Teabaggers, the DF or Danish People's Party, but there's also a good number of people on this continent who hate the Muslims and blacks, a la Anders Breivik in Norway. The only real difference between Europe and the USA is a lot of them don't go around their own neighborhoods carrying guns, pretending they're law enforcement. Well, actually, yes, you're right on that. Racism is racism, and it happens all over the world, and you certainly have your share of them in Denmark as well. However, I did my radio show for an entire week from the headquarters of Danish Radio, DR, there in Copenhagen. It was 3 years ago, as I recall. And I had a whole series of conservatives on the program, one after another. And I asked them, okay, you're a conservative. You want to get rid of your national health care system? Oh, no, we love it. You want to cut the taxes? No, they're fine. We get our money's worth. You want to, lower the price of gas? No, we should be paying for our health care with that. Finally, I'd said, well, what makes you conservative? Well, we don't want any more immigrants. Right? So you're right about the whole racism thing, but your conservatives and our conservatives, big difference. That's it for Your Take, My Take tonight. If you'd like your comments and questions heard on this segment of The Big Picture, listen up.
We want to know your take. Send us your comments by visiting the Thom Hartmann Facebook page, via Twitter at Tom_Hartmann, or in the chat room on the message boards or through the blog at TomHartmann.com. You can also leave a message on our rant line at 202-536-5306. Agree, disagree, sound off? It's all welcome. But remember that your comments may be used on the air.
It's the good, the bad, and the very, very uxorivalentously ugly. The good. Judge Elizabeth Magner. Judge Magner, a federal bankruptcy judge in Louisiana, said that Wells Fargo's behavior during 5 years of litigation with one single homeowner was, in her words, highly reprehensible, and she ordered the big bank to pay the homeowner a staggering $3.1 million in damages. This fine is one of the biggest yet for mortgage servicing misconduct. Judge Magner has a history of criticizing the home loan practices of big banks and defending the homeowners. It's about time we punish the big banks that destroyed our economy with more than just a slap on the wrist. Good on you, Judge Magner. The bad. Jacqueline Cassell. Cassell, the superintendent of the Pontiac Academy for Excellence Middle School in Pontiac, Michigan, fired one of her teachers last week for organizing a fundraiser for Trayvon Martin's family. Brooke Harris, the teacher, knew that many of her students were politically engaged and wanted to help Martin's parents, so she helped them plan a fundraiser where each student would donate $1 to wear a hoodie for a day. Apparently, Superintendent Cassell is against such activism and fired Harris, saying that Harris was being paid to be a teacher, not an activist. Somebody should let Superintendent Cassell know that teaching about activism is teaching about the very core of the history of this nation. And the very, very ugly Herman Cain. In an interview today on Fox So-Called News, Cain suggested that Mitt Romney is losing support of women because women aren't as familiar with policy issues as men are. Referring to President Obama's policies, he said, I think many men are much more familiar with the failed policies than a lot of other people, as well as the general public. Basically, Cain was saying that women are stupider than men and don't have the ability to understand politics. Sorry, Herman. The Republican war on women is much more subtle than simply calling them stupid. Calling them stupid? That's just very, very ugly. For most of the last 100 years, the story of America has been one of inclusion, bringing more and more people into economic prosperity and creating a larger and larger middle class. From bringing women into the middle class with the right to vote and the right to work, to bringing African Americans into the middle class by ending legal segregation and passing civil rights laws, to bringing the poor into the middle class through LBJ's Great Society legislation. But over the last 30 years since Reagan's election, it's been a very different story. It's been a story of exclusion, cutting people out of the American dream, turning the United States into a place where only the top 1% can achieve enormous economic prosperity, and everyone else has to settle to be the working poor. At first, this move to destroy the middle class was done stealthily, quietly, through clever slogans about how government is the problem, through bogus trickle-down economics, and through the brainwashing of the American electorate that greed is good, don't you know? But now, 30 years later, at a time when Americans need the government the most, at a time when trickle-down economics has been demonstrated, proven to be a failure, and at a time when the consequences of greed is good mentality was put on full display in the 2008 economic meltdown, the 1%'s war on the middle class no longer has any gimmicks. Now it's right out in the open, right in our faces, and unapologetic. Best seen in the Republican budget, best carried out by the likes of multimillionaire Congressman Paul Ryan, who wrote that budget, and multimillionaire Mitt Romney, who called that budget marvelous. Consider these numbers. In 2009, the food stamp program reduced the poverty rate in America by nearly 8%. In 2011, the food stamp program cut the number of American children living in poverty in half. That's because helping people put food on the table during rough economic times like the Bush Great Depression helped them to keep their homes, keep their cars, keep their lights on in their houses. It kept them out of desperation and on track to get back on their feet again so one day they could follow the American dream. But despite the incredible economic benefits of food stamps, the Paul Ryan Republican budget would kick millions of Americans out of the program, condemning them to horrible poverty and hunger. The 1% don't want the poor to eat unless it's out of a trash can. And now the war on the middle class is targeting students. A college degree is now pretty much a necessity in America if you want to be successful. It's become the new high school diploma. But Republicans in Congress pushing for trickle-down austerity want to end the practice of middle-class and poor Americans going to college. Despite college tuition and fees going up more than 500% in the last 25 years, and student loan debt topping $1 trillion for the first time in history, federal Pell Grants for students next year will be smaller than they've ever been since the program was created. As this chart shows, it's been a steady decline in financial aid for students over the last 30 years, the 30 years of Reaganomics. And next year, Pell Grants will cover less than 1/3 of the total cost of attending a four-year public university. And the Paul Ryan Republican trickle-down austerity budget kicks 1 million more students out of the Pell Grant program altogether. And then there's health care. The Paul Ryan trickle-down austerity Republican budget ends Medicare as we know it, turns it into a voucher program, stripping middle-class senior citizens of the ability to take care of their medical costs. And it cuts deep into Medicaid, health care for poor people, kicking tens of millions of poor and disabled Americans out of their health insurance plans. It repeals Obamacare, so 14 million children and 100 million adult Americans with pre-existing conditions will lose their insurance. And all the savings that Paul Ryan gets from all of these cuts to America's healthcare system, those savings are going to be handed off to the top 1% as a $3 trillion tax cut, specially tuned for the millionaires and billionaires. If Ryan's budget is enacted, then the middle class dies, and the 1% wins the class war. And here's the kicker. The 1% even have their number one guy running for the highest office in the land. Mitt Romney has taken more money from the banksters in this election cycle than any other candidate even way more than President Obama. He's hiding most of his tax returns so Americans can't find out if he stashed money away in his Swiss account or his Cayman bank account. We can't even find out just how good he is at using tax loopholes to avoid paying his fair share of taxes. But we know he's pretty good at it. As I said, he's called the Paul Ryan budget marvelous, and he supports even more tax cuts for the 1% and more cuts to programs for students in the middle class. And thanks to the Supreme Court, which is the most 1% friendly high court in modern history, the 1% will be able to throw as much money as they want into this election to support Mitt Romney and make sure that they win their war against the middle class. So this is where we stand today, with the middle class under threat. And while this might seem like a new threat to most Americans, it really isn't. It's the same threat that faced President Franklin Roosevelt and a fledgling middle class in the 1930s, in 1936, after the New Deal was passed and being put into place. And here is what Roosevelt said about this threat, the people that he called the economic royalists, way back in 1936.
These economic royalists complain that we seek to overthrow the institutions of America. What they really complain of is that we seek to take away their power. Our allegiance and our allegiance to American institutions requires the overthrow of this kind of power.
Just like in 1936, today, our allegiance to American institutions requires the overthrow of that kind of power. Let's get to work. That's it for The Big Picture tonight. Don't forget, democracy begins when you show up. Get out there and get active. Tag, you're it. See you tomorrow.